I just had a client get caught by a pathological liar. The good news is she didn't get caught for very long. We found out in time, and now I've got the lessons that she took away to share with you. Welcome to the channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. Let me tell you what happened and what the takeaways are so that you can avoid a situation like this in the future. The client met the man about 8 weeks ago, and things started off very well. He was organizing the dates. He was showing up on time. His words were matching his actions, and everything was good so far. He was calling her in between dates. They would go on a real life date about once a week and have a call in between. He was following through. His actions were matching his words, and he was reasonably consistent. Now, he worked during the week, as in 9 to 5, and, would do some housework sometimes on weekends, but there were no glaring red, orange, or really even yellow flags that my client had picked up on. Now, in the second month, this client, she started to get a little bit anxious. She does, however, have an anxious attachment style. So maybe some of you can relate to this. As the connection's starting to grow and as you stop seeing other men in your dating cycle, you do start to feel more vulnerable. So we were having conversations between about week 5 and 6 with this client about some of her anxiety that was really seeming to come up. The guy was taking maybe slightly longer to respond, 4 to 6 hours to respond to certain texts. But the guy was also very open to feedback on this. And what was interesting about this situation was I encouraged my client to bring up a lot of difficult conversations throughout. There was a difficult conversation about his text responsiveness. There was difficult conversations about him paying for the date because he'd been paying for every single date, and she was starting to feel a little bit weird by about the 5th or 6th week. She was saying, well, does he want me to contribute? Maybe I should bring that up. What sort of relationship is he looking for? And the guy was very receptive every time the conversation was brought up. So there was about 3 or 4 times throughout this dating phase that this client brought up quite difficult conversations with him. Paying for the date was a big one. His responsiveness was a big one. She also talked about what he wanted for the future. He wasn't love bombing her by any stretch, but he was just extremely receptive to some really difficult compatibility conversations and treatment conversations. So as far as our coaching, she works with one of my coaches and with me, as far as us two coaches and my client were concerned, things were going well, seemed to be going well. Now, as I say, the one thing that was happening was her anxiety was picking up a bit, but she does have a chronic history of anxiety and an anxious attachment style. So as far as we could tell, there were a lot more green flags than orange and certainly than red ones in this environment. So things are ticking along. Yes, she's a little anxious, but otherwise the guy is changing his behavior. He's being responsive. He's being respectful. Things are seeming good. And then it comes to around about the 6th or 7th week. Now, at this point, they had had sex once, just the once. And the client said, well, do you think it's okay if I should keep having sex with him at this point? And I said to her, look, I would probably slow it down and maybe just wait until exclusivity or close to it. But again, have the conversation with him, because if you've had sex with him once and then you stop, he's probably going to feel a little bit confused. So she had the conversation, and again, he was very receptive. He was totally fine with it. He said, yep, that makes sense. I'll definitely respect your boundary there. We can wait until you're ready. So again, it was good responses to boundary pieces that were going on. So that happened. And then it got to about the 7th week. And again, he was a little busy on certain weekends, but she would usually see him on whichever day he wasn't busy. He was doing housework and stuff, shopping and all that good stuff. And so finally, she's out with him, and they're getting very close to going exclusive in this point. So I'd encourage my client to wait, and I encourage all of you to wait at least 8 weeks. She was getting close to that point, and in fact, she had kind of stopped seeing people around that 4th week, which I assumed was just contributing to her anxiety, but there might be more to the story. In the 8th week, she's out on a date with him. Things are going well. Normal day, fun day. And a woman approaches. The woman says, hey, what are you doing out here? I've been texting you all day. This is to the man. He says, what? I haven't seen your text. Long story short, my client pulls the woman away, and after a lot of tears and an in-depth conversation, it turns out this man had not only been dating both of them, but he had essentially asked this second woman, he had flown her over several months ago to basically be with him. So she was from another country. And he had essentially flown her over to have a relationship with him. He was seeing her, my client and the woman kind of got together after all this and matched their schedules and compared notes. He was basically seeing this woman on the other weekend day that he wasn't with my client, and certain nights. So he had kind of created this web of lies and manipulation to drag my client in and then keep the other relationship going. Now, he tried to deny this, of course. He said, she's just a friend, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as the ladies got together, it was pretty clear what was going on. And the situation was done. Now, I was actually really proud of my client because being an anxious attachment style, you could come out of the situation and have a lot of doubts and a lot of self-loathing and feel like you made a huge mistake. But my client actually handled it brilliantly. She helped handle the emotions and move herself through it. And afterwards, she sat down with me and I said, okay, let's have a look at what did you learn here? With the benefit of hindsight, what would you do differently? And how could you prevent this in the future? So we had a really interesting deep dive that I want to tell you about what were the signs here? What did this guy give away that she perhaps could have picked up on earlier? Now, the first thing I said to this client was, you need to take this as a win because this was 8 weeks. You weren't even exclusive and it was not 8 months or 8 years. And often that's how this goes. So the fact that she took her time gave her the opportunity for something to happen, something for him to give himself away. Now, many things came out after this. For example, he didn't own the house that he said he owned. He was actually renting. He didn't have the job that he said he had. And he was actually quite broke despite paying for all the dates and seemingly having no problem with it. So he was just doing a lot of shady things that he had really good cover for. But this is another reason that we date for a while, is we want to see that something will break in that veneer, that facade, I should say, that will give him away. So I said to this client, okay, let's look over this with the benefit of hindsight. What the hell happened here? How did I mostly miss this? How did you miss this? And then what can we learn from this for the future? Find these little flags and just be aware. Maybe cut this from 8 weeks to 4 weeks if you ever run into a guy like this again. And so we reviewed it. And she said, Mark, you know what? The first 4 weeks, there was nothing I can tell that was given away. But there was a few little things I did notice that in hindsight maybe could have been clues. And the interesting thing about this, guys, was that other than one, which I'm going to share at the end, other than one, each of these were very small things. And it was only the accumulation of them that might have given her some extra clues so that she could have caught this a couple of weeks earlier. So I want to go through some of the signs she's noticed. And again, these were not significant things. The first was that he never used his phone, almost never. You would think it's actually good behavior to not have your phone out when you're around someone and on a date, but it turns out he had his phone away because he was getting messages from this other woman. So he basically never had his phone on around her or with her. Seems like good phone etiquette, but it was a small clue in hindsight. The second was they never exchanged social medias. She never really uses, as in my client never really used social media. So you can see how she would fall into that trap, but potentially exchanging social medias, other than they did exchange LinkedIn, but no real social medias were exchanged. She may have caught clues from seeing his social media. Another clue might have been that they only did voice calls. Sometimes doing video calls gives a little bit more authenticity, as in what's your environment, what are you doing with your day. She did say, well, when we did calls between dates, they were only voice calls and not video calls. I said, okay, that might be something you can do differently next time. One of the bigger details was when he shared about his day, he was never very descriptive, as in he would kind of keep things surfacey and not go into particular detail a whole lot. She assumed this was just kind of how he was, but in hindsight, it may have been a clue. One other smaller sign was that he would occasionally act a little more friend-like to her than romantic. So there was a few times, for example, she could remember in those 5 to 8 weeks where he would stop holding her hand or act more like a friend, maybe not be quite as warm in public as he had been in the past. And in hindsight, that was a way so that either the person at the coffee shop or perhaps someone in his building obviously didn't see that he was with a different woman and kind of put 2 and 2 together. So you can see how these clues were there in hindsight, but they were probably not obvious at the time. And you could almost, if it was only one of those things, you could almost eliminate it. And if everything else was fine, just shrug your shoulders. So there was a bit of accumulation of effects there. But the big one, the biggest thing that this client found, and I think this was the major takeaway that I loved, that she took from this situation as well, is I asked her the question, what was your intuition saying? And she said, Mark, for the first 4 weeks, my intuition was great. I was loving it. He was really well behaved. Everything was going super, super well. And then around the 5th to 6th week, I just started to feel a little bit of a wall. And I thought it was maybe my anxious insecurities, but in hindsight, I think it was my intuition that was probably triggering those because of that wall. I said, interesting. What did he do or say that gave you that wall? And she said, you know what? I'm not even 100% sure. He didn't share a ton about his days. Yes, he didn't do video calls, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I just felt a bit of a wall there. I said, okay, so that occurred about the 5th week around when you started getting anxious. She said, yes. And so I said, what about towards the 7th, 8th week? And she said, yeah, I still felt that wall, if anything, a little bit more. So what we see here, guys, is a progression of she didn't feel any wall for the first 4 weeks when things were fairly superficial, but this wall that she felt in her intuition was starting to ramp up. And this was the most important question, because I said to her, out of 10 in that second month, how would you score the wall? As in how thick, how big, how walled off out of 10 would you say that he was? And she thought about it and she said, in the second month, I was feeling his wall was like a 6 out of 10. And that was the biggest clue. You should never ever be committing to someone where you've got an intuition that there's a 6 out of 10 wall there. Remember, it's supposed to be about progression. We don't necessarily want to find someone who has all their walls up and we try to take them down, because that's more like trying to fix someone, find someone who's broken and walled up and you know, trying to make them love you as a sort of a side quest. What we really want is someone who starts with some of their walls down in a healthy way and then slowly and surely progressively continues to take more walls down and be more open as you get to know them. What we saw here was someone whose walls were quite down and he genuinely seemed quite relaxed, but then after a while those walls started coming up. So the biggest clue that this client took away was to ask herself before she commits, once she got to that middle to end phase of the non-commitment dating, to ask herself, out of 10, how walled does this person feel? And if it's anything higher than a 3, this client's not going to be committing in the future. And this obviously applies to you as well. You've got to make sure your walls are coming down too. But far and away, the biggest takeaway here for her to spot this pathological liar, who is clearly very good at what he does, or what he did, was how high is that wall? Is there a wall there, first of all? And if so, what would I score it out of 10? The other interesting piece that this client realized in this situation was that she kind of became a little more attracted to him as that wall started to go up, as in she started to work a little harder. She wanted to invest in him a bit more. Her mind started to kind of spin and focus on him. And that was a bit of a clue to something she does to keep herself safe and keep guys at a bit of a distance, is attract people who do have that little bit of sexy mystery wall. And I said to her, that's a big part, I think, of the issue here is you guys have had opposite wall patterns. Yours has come down and his has gone up. And she said, yeah, and I found him even sexier as his wall went up. And I said, that's the problem right there. You like guys who are keeping you at a distance, and he probably liked you when you were more walled. He was more relaxed. So in terms of emotional walls, this client kind of has to bring hers down at the start and learn to be more attracted to men who bring theirs down rather than men who ramp theirs up. It's a sneaky way to be emotionally unavailable and to keep love at a distance for fear of being hurt by chasing people who keep their walls up, who are mysterious, who kind of have that distance to them. But really, it's kind of just sending your bandwidth and finding people who actually can't love you because they wall up the closer you get to them. So I said to this client, you're going to have to be super cognizant of this and track this in the future to make sure that a man's walls are coming down as you get to know him better, but also that you're not starting too walled yourself. Because if you start with your walls too high, you'll attract men that are in it for the chase. And then once they've got you, they will start walling up or disappearing themselves. So you want to start with your walls low enough, yes, that you need to protect yourself and stay safe and don't share your deepest vulnerabilities, but they need to be low enough that also you're attracting people who actually like you for you, not people who like you for the chase. So those were the 1 to 2 big takeaways for this client. I hope they helped you. And I hope this video doesn't make you say, damn it, I'm avoiding men because there's pathological liars out there and I'm terrified, so I'm just never going to date. Please don't let this be that. Let this be, okay, by a good dating strategy, we actually remove them reasonably quickly and I can get to the good ones faster than ever. They are out there, I promise. And if you want to find one, I do have my no man, no fee coaching guarantee. So if you want to book a call with me one-on-one, you can ask about that. The link is in the description. Otherwise, if you like the video, give it a subscribe with the thumbs up. And of course, leave a comment with your thoughts. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. Post them below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.